Picture this. You're born, you look around at the other kids on the pitch and you think, yeah, this is going to be great. Then someone hands you a pair of gloves and points you toward the goal. Congratulations. You just drew the worst card in football history. Because being a goalkeeper wasn't just hard. For most of the sport's existence, it was genuinely, historically, almost comically terrible. The rules were stacked against you. The gear barely existed. The respect definitely didn't. And at one point, your own teammates could legally get you killed. And I don't mean that loosely. I mean it somewhat literally, and we'll get there. This video is about all the ways football failed the goalkeeper from day one, the real history, the weird rules, the insane facts most people have never heard. By the end, you're going to look at the keeper completely differently. I've gone through the original rule books, the FIFA archives, and match records going back to the 1800s, and what I found is honestly wild. Let's start somewhere most people don't know about. Because the story actually begins before the goalkeeper even existed. When football wrote its first rulebook in 1863, there was no goalkeeper at all. No designated position, no special rules. Just 11 guys kicking a ball around with zero plan for what happens when it goes toward the net. The role got added later, but the rules around it were all over the place. Early keepers could pick the ball up anywhere in their own half. Not just the box, the entire half. Which sounds like an advantage until you realize nobody could tell who the keeper was, because it wasn't until 1912 that goalkeepers had to wear a different colored shirt. Before that, referees just had to figure it out. Imagine enforcing handball rules when you can't identify which player is allowed to use their hands. That's where this started, and it gets worse fast. Once people played the position seriously, they did it barehanded. William Sykes filed the first patent for goalkeeper gloves in 1885, but almost nobody wore them. The gloves existed on paper for nearly 100 years before keepers used them regularly in the 1970s. So for the better part of a century, professional keepers were catching full-power shots, barehanded, in the cold, on wet leather balls, and just accepting it as normal. The option was sitting right there, and the whole sport said, nah, we're good. That's not even the most dangerous part, because for decades, attacking players were legally allowed to barge straight into the goalkeeper. Shoulder charges into the keeper were permitted, and the position carried real injury risk because of it. There are records of keepers knocked unconscious during matches. One by a goalpost, one by the opposing centre forward and running straight through him. The keeper had basically no protection. You stood in that box, made your save, and sometimes a striker hit you like a freight train. And that was fine, that was football. The rules that protected keepers came slowly and reluctantly, like football kept forgetting the goalkeeper was a person. And speaking of forgetting the goalkeeper was a person, the penalty kick. This one is almost poetic in how unfair it is. The penalty was invented in 1891, created specifically as a punishment. A direct shot at goal with only the keeper to beat. The first goalkeeper to ever face one in a competitive match was James Conner of Airdrieonians, who faced it just 4 days after the rule was introduced. The ink wasn't even dry and some poor keeper was already on the line staring one down. Every other player shares responsibility for a foul in the box. The keeper stands alone and faces the consequence. That's been the deal since day one. Now here's where it gets genuinely bizarre, and this is one of my favorite facts in the whole video. The 1990 World Cup is still the lowest scoring tournament in history, at 2.21 goals per game, a record that still stands. And a massive part of why was goalkeepers killing time. Keepers figured out they could just hold the ball, walk around, burn the clock, and nobody could stop them. In one match, Irish keeper Packy Bonner held the ball for 6 minutes straight. 6 minutes in a World Cup game. So in 1992, FIFA banned the back pass. A keeper can no longer pick up a deliberate pass from a teammate's foot. A rule so fundamental to modern football that most fans never think about it. And it only exists because keepers were so good at exploiting the system that FIFA had to rewrite the rulebook because of them. But the goalkeeper's situation kept changing, and not always for the better. For a long time, if your keeper got sent off, your team was just stuck. No substitution, an outfield player put on the gloves for the rest of the match. It wasn't until 1994 that FIFA allowed injured or red-carded goalkeepers to be substituted. Before that, a keeper's red card wasn't just bad for the keeper, it was potentially catastrophic for the whole team, and there was nothing anyone could do. And teams absolutely tried to game it the other way. At the 2010 World Cup, North Korea tried to register a striker named Kim Myong-won as a third goalkeeper. The logic was obvious. List a striker as a keeper and you get an extra outfield player on the roster. FIFA caught it immediately and ruled he couldn't play as an outfield player if he was registered as a keeper. He never played a single minute. The position was so separately categorized that a national team tried to use it as a smuggling loophole and got shut down cold. And through all of this, the barehanded catches, the shoulder charges, the solo penalty punishment, the rule rewrites, there was almost no individual recognition either. In over 70 years of the Ballon d'Or, exactly one goalkeeper has ever won it. 1. Lev Yashin in 1963. The World Cup even named its best goalkeeper award the Yashin Award, essentially admitting he was so singular the trophy needed his name on it. He's credited with saving over 150 penalties across his career, an absurd number given everything we just talked about. But for all the difficulty and uniqueness of the position, the sport barely acknowledged it when handing out the big prizes. And then there's the part I said I'd come back to, because this one stops you cold. In 2023, a Belgian goalkeeper named Arne Espiel collapsed on the pitch seconds after saving a penalty. He was 25. He died. And beyond that specific tragedy, keepers have a long history of fatal on-pitch collisions, from charging into crowded boxes, diving at feet, the physical chaos right in front of the goal. The position has always carried a different kind of risk than any other role on the pitch, and for most of football's history, the sport barely acknowledged it, let alone protected against it. So look at the full picture, a position invented late, defined loosely, physically punished for a century without proper gear, singled out for a new punishment rule within days of its creation, exploited as a roster loophole, largely ignored by individual awards, and dangerous enough that it has genuinely cost people their lives. And yet, the goalkeeper became one of the most iconic figures in the sport. The last line of defense, the one player who can single-handedly keep a team in a game, the hero of a penalty shootout in a way no striker ever quite matches. If you want to keep going down this rabbit hole, watch the video on the most insane rule changes in football history. A lot of what we covered today connects directly to it and goes even deeper. And if you've never subscribed, now's a pretty good time because this is the kind of stuff we do here. The goalkeeper started as a position that didn't exist, became a position nobody wanted, survived 100 years of being underpaid in every sense of the word, and somehow ended up the most psychologically demanding, tactically critical, and individually exposed role in the sport. You went from invisible in the rulebook to being the reason FIFA had to rewrite it. That's not a bad arc. It just took about 130 years of suffering to get there.